Hey everyone, how's it going? Aaron Rift here from NoDQ.com. This is a special edition of the NoDQ panel. I am being joined by the usual panel guests, good old JM Jeff Meacham and Virtue, the greatest columnist in NoDQ.com history. It's just the three of us today. We are here to reflect on the life and times of Bobby the Brain Heenan, who sadly passed away at the age of 72. According to his book, he was born November 1st, 1944. Bobby Heenan passed away. We all know that he's been dealing with cancer for many years. He's been in bad health. He recently had to pull out from an appearance because he was unable to travel. It's just really sad, but at least his family was with him when he died, and I believe he died because of organ failures. So essentially, it was complications due to the battle with cancer. So Jeff, I want to start with you.
Yeah.
Jeff, you had the opportunity to meet Bobby Heenan, as we can see in that picture. You met Bobby Heenan. You interviewed him twice on NoDQ.com when you guys were doing the Extreme Mayhem audio series on NoDQ, back when it was themayhem.com. So
Correct.
What were your memories of doing that interview, those two interviews with Bobby Heenan? By the way, those interviews are up on the NoDQ.com website and the YouTube channel. So what were your thoughts on that interview and talking to Bobby?
First of all, it's a huge file over 2.5 hours or something like that. So if you want to have something to pass your time, that's the viewing to do right there on NoDQ's YouTube channel. Prior to the interviews with Extreme Mayhem, of course, I mean, I remember when I first got involved watching professional wrestling, which was October 1990. Rick Rude had just left the WWF, and Bobby took Rude's feud with the Boss Man to a whole other level. He took the entire Heenan family against the Boss Man. He threw Barbarian and Haku, and of course, nobody beats Mr. Perfect. Nobody. And Boss Man did in fact beat him at WrestleMania 7, but not for the title, the Intercontinental Championship. Of course, that was my first memory of Bobby being the manager. Of course, was his last full-time managerial position was Mr. Perfect WrestleMania 7, and then he went into commentating. I've said many times in the last couple of years that Paul Heyman's the greatest manager of all time. I need to rescind that immediately. Bobby Heenan is both the best wrestling manager of all time because, like they've always said, he wrestled like a manager and managed like a wrestler. That's how Bobby worked, and he was amazing.
Jeff,
and
actually, I wanted to say that I watched back on your Talk Wrestling from 2010 when you did your top 5 managers of all time, and you listed Heenan as number 1.
Right, and that was in 2010. I've been watching Paul Heyman's work the last couple of years since he's been back with Brock, and I've kind of wavered on that. Let me set the record straight right now. Talk Wrestling 2010 is where it needs to be. Bobby Heenan's the best ever. He's also, in my opinion, the greatest color commentator of all time in professional wrestling. You've had Jerry Lawler, you've had various people over the years, but Bobby was the guy. Him and Gorilla are my favorite announcing. We've talked about this with Virtue over the last year or so. But yes, we had him on Extreme Mayhem, and it was an honor both times. We had him just after WWE had done the confidential piece on him, and he had just released his first book, and we talked about that. We made fun of Tony Schiavone both times, which is easy to do nowadays. But hey, you know what? Tony was very respectful on the podcast, so God bless Schiavone for that. But Bobby it's so funny. The biggest, smarmiest heel in the history of wrestling managers was the nicest guy we ever met. And I got to present him with our very first NoDQ Extreme Man, whatever you call it, guest of the year when I saw him at Rob Van Dam's 5-Star Comics in 2004. And he signed both my books, both his books. So meeting Bobby was one of the first times I really felt like we had got something done. Like we were really accomplishing getting our foot in the door, so to speak. Bobby's treatment of us, Bobby's acknowledgement of how good we were doing, validated NoDQ and validated the Extreme Mayhem show. Of course, here we are 15 years later. So Virtue, I know I went on for a long time there. Sorry about that. But what are your memories of the Weasel? The Brain, excuse me.
He's the best of all time. He is the influence on why I've attempted to do some indie shows. Yesterday, I was out of working local small indie shows for about a year. Before the news broke, I went back and I did a show for the first time in about a year yesterday, and I was a manager. We were heels. We drew heat. It went over well. and then I go to the back, get my phone, and I see that. So that's how literally I just was a manager at an indie wrestling show, and then I find out Bobby Heenan passed away. Now, his last several years, it's awful. I couldn't even look at his pictures online. Let's be honest. You know, that's just a nasty disease, throat, mouth cancer, whatever he had. I remember Bobby at about 7 or 8 years old with the Andre the Giant, right around WrestleMania 3. That's when I started watching wrestling. So that's the Bobby I remember. And I know from Andre, he went on. We got the Brain Busters. We got Rick Rude. This even before Mr. Perfect. And something about him, his delivery. You know, you wanted to hate Bobby, but at the same time, and this is coming from a 7, 8-year-old kid, I liked him. And I think he is one of the big reasons why I didn't like the baby faces. You know, and think about that. Maybe I was just one of those rare, you know, I was supposed to like Hulkamania, right, Jeff? But I didn't.
Exactly.
I'm reflecting on all this last night, watching YouTube. I know Jeff said he was on the WWE Network, but I haven't got that far yet because I was just watching clips on YouTube, and I was like, why did I like heels so much? And I think it was because of Bobby the Brain Heenan. You know, I don't want that to make it sound like he wasn't doing his job because you're supposed to hate them, but he was awesome. I mean, do you see him bump? He was because I've been in a ring and I bump, so I always talk about that. And he was the best manager to take a bump.
Well, it's like I said, he wrestled like a manager and managed like a wrestler.
Yeah.
So there you go.
And his announcing,
that's Bobby.
His commentating was great. I mean, it was absolutely great. I wish we could have had him and a JR combo at some point, like for a run. You know,
I mean, we did at WrestleMania and Kicking the Ring the first year, '93.
The attitude era, JR.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the thing about his commentary.
This sucks, man.
Yeah, the thing about his commentary is that he had a lot of good sound bites. You know, with Jerry Lawler was more about being the comic relief, but when it was down to being serious, I think Heenan had some really good dramatic moments, like when Goldberg won the WCW title from Hogan. Bobby Heenan's commentary was great there, and when Hogan turned heel and formed the NWO, Bobby Heenan was right there. His commentary is what really stood out more than Shivani and more than everyone else. I mean, Heenan really stood out in those critical moments.
Which is terrible because on WWE releases, they edit out Bobby's suspicion of Hogan now. It's like, come on, that's gold.
And here's the thing with Bobby, Jeff. So let's talk about him and Rick Rude. So when you can remember those two guys out in front of the camera, how was the dynamic? And I'm going to tell you why I'm picking those two.
I know exactly why you're picking those two. And out in front of the camera, there was nobody better than Rude and Heenan at the time.
You would think these guys were supposed to be together, and it delivered. But we know from Bobby Heenan podcasts and interviews, he did not. Him and Rick Rude were not. I mean, they were bitter, not bitter, but you know, it was just a working relationship. That was it.
Well, no, Rick was always afraid, and Bobby even said this. Rick was always afraid that Bobby was trying to steal his thunder, and that was never the case. Bobby always tried to get the other guy over, and Rick, I don't know if Rick Rude was paranoid or what, but Bobby even said on the show that Rick was afraid Bobby was trying to steal his heat, and that was never the case with the Weasel, ever.
Yeah. So it was awesome, dude. I mean, we're going to be watching this stuff, and here's what bothers me. And Jeff, you're one of those guys that you always talk about the guys that you like, alive or deceased.
Yep.
And I'm the same way. I mean, I went back and I looked at my Twitter feed, and I've had Bobby Heenan tweets over the last 5 years.
Right.
The people that come out all of a sudden after a passing or a tragedy happens, come on, people, let's celebrate these guys while they're still alive. Talk about them. Who cares? Let's not make an event like this to bring everything to the table again.
This is what I said on my video. I said I'm glad that I've been praising him for all these years when he was alive
me too.
to tell him how great he was. And I always said he was one of the best, if not the best manager and one of the best commentary figures ever in wrestling. So I think we all were praising him for the longest time. So it's not like all of a sudden we're Bobby Heenan fans.
No, but there are some out there. We've seen them already in the last 24 hours. There are some out there.
It does happen with any celebrity. You know, when Michael Jackson died, you had everybody coming out saying, oh, Michael Jackson was great. But we were always singing our high praises for Bobby Heenan.
And I'm just saying, really, I guess all I'm saying is if you like something, let everybody know, and let them know before something bad happens to that person. You know, it's okay. That's what social media is for.
Well, I said last night when this news broke, or last afternoon, actually, yesterday when the news broke, I said flat out that we had done some interviews in the previous month or 2 months of Extreme Mayhem. Bobby being on the show legitimized the show and NoDQ, the Mayhem.com itself, because Bobby's appearance on that show let people know that we were a serious player.
Yeah, that was November 2002, so that was about a month after you guys started doing the audio shows. And
Thanksgiving.
He was like the first really big guest that was on Extreme Mayhem, so he really helped you guys gain some credibility in the internet wrestling community.
I am firmly convinced that Bobby being on the show brought Mike Tenay to the show. And if it hadn't been for Mike Tenay, there'd be no West Coast Professor nickname. So there you go.
Right, and Tenay came on, and then all these other big names came on. Randy Savage came on at one point. And
Dusty, Jarrett, all those guys came on after Bobby's appearance. And Bobby came back to us after WrestleMania the next year. So, you know.
Yeah, I think that was like the 50th episode of Extreme
Something
Mayhem.
like that.
So he came on for that. And, you know, because of XM, there was XMV, and because of XMV, there was Talk Wrestling. Because of Talk Wrestling, there was NoDQ Video, and because of NoDQ Video, there's this. So, you know, in a way, you could say Bobby Heenan brought us all together.
It's very easy to go back and say that without Bobby Heenan, we'd not be sitting here 15 years later.
That's right. 40-year active career in the business from about 1960 to 2000. And here's the thing. After 2000, and then, you know, the cancer started chipping away, he was still making wrestling-related appearances and Comic Cons and all that kind of stuff. So this guy clearly loved the business.
I still say his speech in 2004 at the Hall of Fame is the best Hall of Fame acceptance speech ever.
Yeah, I did watch that again.
I watched it this morning. I listened to it on the way home. I talked to Aaron when I was on my way home from my errands, and I immediately found it. I couldn't find the whole clip without going to the network, and the network just eats the data to death. Oh. So I found it on Daily Motion, believe it or not, and I listened to the whole thing on my earbuds. I found myself chuckling uncontrollably because even at his cancer stages that he was, it was so funny and so refreshing. And of course, I got the tear in my eye when he mentioned he wished that Monsoon was there. And now I'm imagining that Bobby is driving the Almighty crazy because he's fighting with Gorilla already.
Yep. And the Hammond-Eggers and the humanoids, like I said, the debate online if he's 72 or 73, that's Bobby Heenan. I'm sorry. It's Bobby Heenan doing that, you know?
He is already working everybody less than a day later. There you go. So
it's awesome.
He's great.
He just had the natural timing. He just knew what he was doing. He had it was born in him, I guess you could say, to be an entertainer.
And Aaron, you mentioned it last night in your video. The 92 Royal Rumble match was the best commentated Rumble match ever. Not only was it star-studded, like Ric Flair's mentioned many times, all the people in that match, but Gorilla and Bobby's complete dramatic over Flair. Is he out? Is he in? And when Flair won, Bobby's reaction sold everything. And the interview with Flair, Perfect, and Bobby was amazing.
Yeah. Here's one for you, Jeff. So we know, he brought Flair into WWF. That was a storyline. Flair, for all intents and purposes, I enjoyed that run. He brought in Luger, too, but they didn't really stick with it. I think if Bobby stuck with Luger longer, Luger might have had a more credible WWE run. What do you think? I mean, yeah. I was just thinking about that.
Bobby mentioned on Extreme, I actually listened to the show, so I know I wanted to say here. Bobby liked Lex a lot, and I think he mentioned this to us in passing after we went off the taping part. Yeah. When Hogan left for good, they had to get the machine behind somebody. Vince already had Lex picked out for that big run at the end of the summer of '93. So the Narcissist was already going to move on from the Perfect feud and move on from that. So it was already in the works. That's why Bobby didn't stick with Lex.
And he was pretty much done with managing by that point also.
Well, I mean, for the most part, he was still kind of he was advising Flair toward the end of his WWF run until Perfect beat him on Raw, the Loser Leaves WWF match, which was an amazing match and great sell by Bobby. I still say Bobby's greatest Raw moment ever was his exit. Gorilla Monsoon lifting him up and tossing him out of the door and the toilet paper going everywhere. And Bobby's tears are legitimate in that video. They're completely 100% real because he was leaving what he thought was the greatest moment. And it turned out, of course, he got insurance. Yeah, he was closer to his daughter. But his viable wrestling career was all over for all intents and purposes. He was a great commentator at WCW, but he was never happy there.
Yeah, it was just strictly a business decision to go to WCW.
It was.
How did he break? He broke his neck in the '80s. How did that happen? I never looked into that.
he was in a match. He said it on the show. It was a match between him and I forget his partner now.
Was he wrestling as a manager?
I think so. It was him and somebody against Onita. As soon as I forgot the first name. Onita came down with what was then the Atomic Leg Drop doing before Hogan adopted it, and he came down on Bobby's face and turned his head just the wrong way. Bobby thought he pinched a nerve in his neck for years and years. When he retired from the ring in '91, he was going for surgery, and then Vince said, "Ric Flair, 6 months." He lasted 10 days. Because he couldn't hang with Larry Flint. Like Bobby said,
he broke his neck for the business, though. That's the point. That's why I brought that up.
And what's funny is that neck collar that he wore at WCW led to the Pillman incident, which we've all talked about over the years, where Bobby dropped an F-bomb in the middle of the Clash of Champions.
Yeah, I was just about to mention that too. Yeah, that became an issue. So what about before WWF? You know, he was obviously in the AWA for many years. He managed Nick Bockwinkel. He had a lot of different matches. Any favorite memories watching back on the AWA, Jeff, involving Bobby Heenan?
The Weasel suit started there. The Weasel suit was against Greg Gagne before it was against the Ultimate Warrior. So that's always funny. I don't know if it's on the network. I haven't seen it on the network yet. I haven't really gone back and looked through the entire history on the network, but there is a match between Hogan and Nick Bockwinkel where Hogan actually defeats Bockwinkel for the AWA title. It was stricken by President Stanley Blackburn, overturned the decision because Hogan got disqualified or whatever the hell it was. But for that moment, Bobby's and Nick Bockwinkel's loss to Hogan was huge. It popped the entire territory. And then the minute Vern Gagne got involved and Blackburn got involved, Hogan decided, see ya.
Yeah, so Hogan went to the WWF and Heenan followed as well. You know, Vince was signing up all the talents from the territories.
Yep.
Well, I was just going to say, Bobby in his Hall of Fame speech said, you know, AWA stood for all the world's assholes. And the minute it started going down, he said it on the speech and with us, he called Hogan. You know, do you have room for us? And Hogan immediately called Vince, get Gene and get Bobby. That's what you got to do. Which is the same thing Eric Bischoff did 10 years later. When he wanted to get Hogan involved, he brought in Mean Gene and he brought in the Brain.
Yep. And then Heenan went in, I think, the end of '84, towards the end of '84. I think Okerlund came in first, early part of '84, because he was there when Hogan won the title. Heenan came in the later part. He was part of WrestleMania, managing Big John Studd against Andre the Giant. Of course, the whole body slam challenge thing, and Andre slams Studd, and then he starts throwing the money away, and Heenan's freaking out, and Heenan grabs the bag and runs to the back. That was great. And then Heenan would manage a lot of Hogan's foes throughout the 80s. You had the match with King Kong Bundy at WrestleMania 2, Bundy Mania, and then Orndorff turning heel on Hogan and joining back up with Heenan. That led up to their cage match, and then, of course, WrestleMania 3, Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan. Bobby Heenan was right there as part of the build-up, brainwashing Andre to set up the match with Hogan. So Heenan was in a lot of key moments in wrestling history. He was managing the top guys that were facing Hogan, and he was definitely part of the build and drawing. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from Hogan and Andre, but no doubt Heenan help put people in those seats for that pay-per-view.
That was the true invasion, AWA. That the invasion never happened with WCW.
Know, right?
Go back and look at AWA into WWE, even though it wasn't quite the same, but that was a great invasion. Aaron, bringing up WrestleMania 3, the body slam was iconic. You know what else to me was iconic? Andre and Bobby in the cart coming to the ring. Like Russo brought that up. I listened to his podcast today. He brought that up, and then I went and I found an image of that. Just unbelievable.
And them leaving too, all distraught.
Andre's just staring Hogan down in the cart. Bobby's just like this. He's all bent out of shape. He's totally sad. Yeah. Think about WrestleMania 3 for a minute. That Piper's Pit that set up that match. Roddy, Hulk, Andre, Bobby, and Jesse Ventura on one screen setting up the match of the century. And what's funny is Bobby was supposed to manage Jesse, as you recall, but Jesse, the blood clots in his legs, he had to retire. But yeah, Jesse, Bobby, Roddy, Hulk, and Andre in one shot setting up the biggest match of all time. That's how much Bobby meant to the WWF and to professional wrestling.
Yep, and the fact that match sucked, but it was so memorable and great. But listen, but that doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
All the guys you just mentioned and their star power and their entertaining value is why it is all-time great.
Absolutely.
Yep, exactly.
And then Heenan went on to manage several IC champions, Rick Rude, Mr. Perfect. Managed the tag team champions, the Brainbusters. And during this time, Heenan also started his own show on Primetime Wrestling. So you had Heenan doing Primetime Wrestling with Gorilla Monsoon. And a lot of people have very fond memories of those shows because Heenan and Monsoon were like a classic comedy team, like an Abbott and Costello.
Costello, I was going to say Abbott Costello, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Aaron, don't forget about the Colossal Connection, Haku and Andre the Giant.
Right.
Yeah,
they were tag team champions.
They were another great team as well. But I mean, Primetime Wrestling was just so entertaining to see these two guys. I mean, they were like a classic comedy team, and they just had that chemistry together. They worked so well together. Heenan was always up to shenanigans, and Monsoon had to put him in his place.
Will you stop? I'm not going to tell you again. I'll throw you out of here.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, think about it. Bobby Heenan's teams ended Demolition's first 2 tag team championship reigns.
Yes.
That is true.
And the extension of Bobby at the commentating booth, it brought a lot to WCW during their Monday Night Wars getting ahead of WWF, especially the fact he was such a dynamic team with Monsoon on WWE programming for so long. I remember that was one reason why I started watching Nitro more. Besides the talent going over there, Bobby Heenan, color commentary.
Well, the fact of the matter is, Bobby didn't like Tony. Tony didn't like Bobby, but Bobby manned up, nutted up, stood at the plate, and knocked everyone out of the park. Him and Tenay were professionals, and Schiavone was what he was at the time. I'm sure he's much better now. I haven't talked to Tony in a long time, don't know. But Bobby was always a pro. Even when he was hurt, even when he was not so happy, he remained a pro until they decided to job him out and send him away.
And he even did announcing during the Russo eras too. I mean, imagine how hard that had to be for some guys. He still did it until they brought Madden in.
Yeah. I would say the only negative was that sometimes he would make like really dated references on Nitro to stuff from like 30 years prior that people would not understand. So I do feel like he was kind of getting behind the times at the end. When you had the Attitude Era, it felt like Heenan was out of place. So
but he still wasn't. He still wasn't.
I disagree with that, man. That. Like, I get what you're saying about dated because you could bring that up today. We could say Jim Cornette's philosophy in wrestling. I don't know, man, though. Like, that's what made Bobby Heenan. I think if you tried to say everything up to modern time, it would have been like, that's not you, Bobby. That's just my opinion, though.
Yeah, Aaron. But when you have teenagers watching, you got to...
They were going to watch anyway because of the stars. So I like Bobby doing that.
People were tuning out of WCW. It was all about the youth and being hip and cool to the teenage audience. That was what
Are you talking that last year he did it? Is that what you're talking
like
about?
Right.
Okay, maybe so. Yeah, maybe.
Bobby still didn't date himself as much as Larry Zbyszko did, though. We got to give him that.
Yeah, I mean, Zbyszko was bad, too. I mean, that was just one of many problems with WCW. But Heenan, even when Heenan was not at his best, or maybe when he was getting over the hill or whatever, he still was one of the best commentary performers in the business. I mean, he was still great. And, Mark Madden tried to replace him and just couldn't do it. I mean.
Well, okay. Bobby said it best when he brought Flair in. Ice cream, horse manure. Okay? Just saying. With all due respect to Mark Madden, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, it's funny. Bobby himself demanded, and he very, very, very little demands at WCW, but he demanded they pay respect to Gorilla when Gorilla passed away. I thought that was very cool.
Oh, yeah, definitely. When he came out there on Nitro and paid tribute to Monsoon, that was a very touching moment from him. I just remember, Primetime Wrestling between those two guys and the Bobby Heenan show, and he had so many fun moments with Piper.
I mean, the Bobby Heenan show was like, 4 episodes? But it was 4 of the most golden half hours in WWF history. It was so bad, but so good.
Yeah. I mean, that stuff with Roddy Piper, them going back and forth, that was very entertaining. And all that stuff is on the network, by the way.
SummerSlam you could lose the whole night. You could lose an entire night watching Bobby Heenan.
SummerSlam 91 is my favorite 3-man team still. Gorilla, Bobby, and Roddy. So
that was good. Yeah, that was very good. Very good.
Can you imagine all 3 of them in the commentary booth now? Like, oh my gosh, that'd be frightening to be up there right now listening to all that. My head would explode.
But yeah, I would say to people out there that have not been familiar with Bobby Heenan, I would say watch the 92 Rumble as a starting point. I mean,
Yes.
Virtue, what do you think? What would be the starting point for somebody who's not familiar with Bobby Heenan?
All of them. But
all of them.
92 Rumble is a great starting point. Me personally, I talked up the Andre era. I really enjoyed Mr. Perfect and Bobby the Brain Heenan together. Those were my guys. So go back and watch all of Mr. Perfect, Curt Hennig's feuds as the Intercontinental Champion with Bobby by his side. That's just my personal favorite. The matches with Kerry Von. Hey, the matches with Texas Tornado, Jeff, was Bobby. Bobby was with Perfect for those, wasn't he? Yes, right. Because I know the Genius came and the coach came with Mr. Perfect after Bobby, right. Well, no, Genius was there with Bobby, wasn't he?
No. Genius started as Perfect. Well, Perfect came by himself.
That's right. He was first.
And then Genius managed him going into WrestleMania 6, and then Perfect became IC champion because of Bobby. And then when Bobby retired from the ring, he passed off to John Tolos, the coach. But even when Perfect lost the Intercontinental title, Bobby was still at ringside doing commentary.
Yeah.
So Bobby was always there at Mr. Perfect. I agree with Rich 100%. If you want to watch a good starting point for Bobby Heenan as a manager, the SummerSlam 1990 interview with Mr. Perfect going into the Tornado match. Because that was one of the few times I said, nobody's Mr. Perfect, nobody together. That was really cool. Commentary-wise, SummerSlam 91 is my personal favorite besides the 92 Rumble. 92 Rumble is his best commentary moment, the match itself, ever.
And I would also like to add the Tuesday Night Titans episodes where Bobby Heenan was a guest, or he was a guest with one of his wrestlers. He was always very entertaining on those as well. And those segments are more forgotten about because they were so long ago. But Tuesday Night Titans had some really entertaining segments, and definitely the ones with Bobby Heenan were really good. Virtue, anything else you would like to add?
For the old schoolers, go back and watch clips on YouTube of all the AWA stuff with Bockwinkel, him going to Japan and signing a deal for Bockwinkel. That was just all good
I like
stuff.
the stuff with the machines when Andre the Giant was wearing the mask and Heenan was accusing him. That was great stuff too. And he had a lot of segments on the Tuesday Night Titans programs when he was accusing Andre of wearing the mask and all that stuff, getting him suspended. Yep. And then that would eventually lead up to WrestleMania. But yeah, that was all great stuff. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up. You guys watching this, you can follow Virtue at NoDQ_Virtue. And you can follow Jeff at _Jeff Meacham. You can follow me at Aaron Rift and at NoDQ_DOTCOM on all the platforms. Share us your memories, any of your favorite Bobby Heenan matches, segments, whatever. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think. And stay tuned to NoDQ.com for the very latest in the world of wrestling. We will see you next time.